Okay, thank you very much. I hope you had an enjoyable lunch and you're ready now for our afternoon session. This morning we've heard a lot of viewpoints on the nature of affordability, quality and sustainability, but we've heard mainly about the problems involved. We've heard about the political issues, we've heard about the financial issues, we've examined some of the planning issues that we have to address, and we've had some solutions suggested along the way. But now we come to probably a very interesting part of today, which is our panel discussion. We have 4 panelists, each of whom are an expert in their field, but they've also been selected because they're pretty forthright in their views. And they're going to give, each of them is going to give us a 3-minute exposition of their views on the nature of affordability and how to address the problem of affordability. Then we're going to throw it open to the floor, and we're hoping that you can engage in discussion with the panelists, and I'll ask each of them to respond in turn to your questions, and we can get a bit of a discussion going. So without delaying any longer, could I please ask our 4 panelists to take a seat on the stage? I can see 3. 4, that's fantastic. Okay, so first of all, let me introduce Pamela Bell. Pamela. Pamela is probably New Zealand's foremost expert on prefabrication and prefab construction. She has a Masters of Architecture, I think related to that, and is CEO of the industry body PrefabNZ. And I think probably quite a few people also know she was actually New Zealand's first ever Olympic snowboarder. Ooh. From there to prefab, it's an easy jump, you know. So. Yeah. Our second speaker will be Pip Cheshire, and Pip is currently the president of the New Zealand Institute of Architects and a current holder of their coveted gold medal. Our third speaker is Scott Figenshow. Scott is Director of Community Housing Aotearoa, and he's passionate about the role of social housing in community building and different financial models for assisting people into housing. And finally, Tim Robinson, who's a Senior Associate at Jasmax. Tim came from the UK, where he was involved in urban regeneration projects of some scale, and I think in Newcastle. He did quite a lot of work there. And he moved here in 2008, has already had a bit of an impact, and is deeply involved in master planning for the Tamaki redevelopment project. So I'm now going to hand you over to our first speaker, which is Pamela. You have 3 minutes, go.
Great. Okay, thanks everybody, and thank you for your attention post-lunch, that's fantastic. I just want to pick up on what you already know, really, which is about this impending wall of work that we're all slowly waiting to kick in. And Warwick might have given the same statistic that he gave to our board last week, which is, I believe, 300,000, let me get this right, it would be tragic, wouldn't it? 400,000 homes that are needed in the next 30 years, and that is 13,500 consents a year, and I think at our peak, 2003, we did 12,000. So interesting times ahead. And I guess what the PrefabNZ space is taking out of this is that we can't deliver this with business as usual, that we have to rethink the way we're delivering our housing. And one option is to pre-build pieces away from the construction site. PrefabNZ this year put out what's called the value case for prefab. It's a PDF on the About page of our website, which tries to put into numbers some of the questions we get asked, and we heard today, which is how much cheaper is it? We're trying to reframe that conversation towards increasing quality, reducing timeframes, and then talking about cost effectiveness. Sustainability, waste reduction is a big part of that process, along with other intangibles like increasing health and safety. And we all know how important that is in the media at the moment, and in regulatory life. And the other part of which I'm really passionate about is delivering high quality design. Pre-building components does not mean spitting out ticky-tacky boxes that all look the same. We've moved a long way since the 1950s and 60s, and even a long way since the 70s and 80s when a number of us went to school in those prefab classrooms. So what we're talking about now is more what we see on grand designs is the easiest way to talk about it. Panels and modules, modular bathrooms, just pre-building items where we can control the quality before it is getting to the construction site. In terms of numbers, unfortunately most of our statistics are around standalone housing, so we've got a lot of work to do as an industry to gather statistics around attached and multi-residential housing. But the numbers say that we can save $30,000 to $40,000 per house, that we can reduce up to 90% of waste, which can have a bottom line effect of 2.5% of savings. I think importantly we need to talk about health and safety and quantify it. A really good example is the College of Creative Arts building in Wellington at Massey University. Arrow delivered the roof, the whole project, but the way they delivered the roof was to pre-build sections on the ground, and as a result they saved a third of the cost, half of the time, and only spent 12% of time at height. So when one guy walked off the end of the roof jig, they managed to keep him. There were no fatalities. If he'd been up on the roof, it would be a different story. What was interesting about that, and also a conversation I followed up with Michael after his presentation, is that Arrow didn't account for the time savings. So when it rained, they were able to still work underneath the roof jig. They didn't count how many guys worked for how many days, but again, there are some time savings, and as an industry, we're yet to learn how to account for that upfront in order for our clients to fairly appraise traditional and non-traditional delivery methods. Cool, so I'm probably within my 3 minutes.
Absolutely fantastic. An Olympic performance. Thank you very much. Now, Pip, please.
I'm going to stand if you don't mind. I'm afraid I can only talk when I stand and think when I sit down, so you're going to hear me, but don't expect too much going on up here. We might think of affordability, quality and sustainability as the three critical components of a Venn diagram that describes New Zealand's, and I suspect other countries' housing supply. In that context, it's interesting to note that sustainability seems to have muscled aside time as the third leg of the supply side triptych. Are we now to say to a client, you can have cheap and good quality, but it won't be sustainable? Where we once have said, but it won't be quick? I mean, that triptych, you're all familiar with this. You can have 2 out of 3. Time, of course, though, remains a critical aspect. Though in this discussion, I don't think it's the time of delivery that's most relevant, but the longevity of the built object. We've constructed an industry that is a complex mix of private enterprise and public manipulation. All aspects of the industry, be it land procurement, designing, funding and contracting, are manipulated by a phalanx of local and central government agencies and a raft of regulating quangos. We can't avoid this. The supply of housing at a mass scale and the issues of land and resources used in that supply, the requirements for consumer protection and so forth, are too complex for an unfettered market to meet. Indeed, we might need a greater degree of manipulation if we're somehow to square this triangle of affordability, quality and sustainability, and do it in a timely fashion. I believe that we have far too low expectations of building life, that we should aim to significantly increase the projected life of our housing. We should be making buildings whose structure, service and infrastructure, exterior cladding and so forth should be designed with a lifespan of a few hundred years rather than a few decades. And they should be designed and constructed to facilitate the reuse and refitting of the base building to meet demographic, climatic and lifestyle changes. We should make housing that is robust, resilient and reconfigurable. This must surely be the basis of sustainable housing. Treating housing as a short-life commodity damns us to a preoccupation with first cost. We must see the supply of housing as a national asset, as critical to the country as hydro dams, seaports and urban transit systems. It's only through the use of the public funds that the nut of affordability and sustainability can be cracked. The short-term profit expectations on which the industry is based must not be the determinant of housing quality or resource use. Only then can the goal of optimising affordability, quality and sustainability be achieved. That's me.
Thank you. I thought there was some thought involved in that. That's very good. Scott, please.
Great, thanks. Look, I'll just stay seated here. The community housing sector is in a really interesting place right now. We've got these broad goals in the housing reform program where 20% of New Zealand's social and affordable housing is meant to be delivered by the not-for-profit, not-for-dividend community housing sector. So varying ways you count that number. I hear the housing minister counts it, that it's meant to be 20% of the 67,000 houses that Housing New Zealand's operate. We don't quite look at it that way. We look at it much more around that there's somewhere between 100 and 200,000 New Zealand families who are not able to meet their housing needs on their own in the current marketplace. So that 20% number looks much more like anywhere from 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 households potentially. So how is an emerging sector meant to meet that kind of challenge? And I'll probably use my very limited time here to really focus on whether we call it economics or finance. I'll leave that to you to decide which you wish to call it. But largely around how do we use the financial levers that are currently at play, but use those to deliver true affordability on a long-term basis. So I'm gonna want us all to just for a moment know that the house that we're talking about sits in the context of a neighborhood, and that neighborhood, in our view, largely needs to be a mixed tenure, mixed income, mixed typology neighborhood. Completely comfortable that my colleagues across the panel know far more than I do about how we get that house built, how we get that community well designed, how we get that structure well designed. And so if we just do a big tick that yep to everything else everybody's saying there, and now how do we finance that for a family that may only be on $40,000 a year or may have a disabled member and living on a benefit? That family's need circumstance may be short-term in nature or it may be a very long-term in nature. So when we're looking at the new tools that are around us now, so we've got special housing areas. In today's Dominion Post, Wellington now has one, Christchurch has got one, even Queenstown's got one, and of course Auckland has one. The tools of the special housing, of the accords are that we have these special housing areas, so we're suspending our normal process to make sure that we can fast track things in those areas. By doing so, that fast tracking process is creating a tremendous amount of wealth in terms of land value. And are we willing to look at that land value and say some portion of that should be dedicated to social and affordable housing? Thrilled to see that in the Auckland context that yes, the option of doing 5% retained housing in the special housing areas is one of those tools out there. And I look at my colleague Peter Jeffries, Community of Refuge Trust is a member of Community Housing Aotearoa. How do I make sure that Peter's got the resources to meet with that landowner and pay a retained affordable price for that piece of land that's now coming into the market? Well, we know that that section might have an indicative of value in today's market, despite we just learned that the market's meant to be going down. So I'm probably one of the few guys in the room who's like, yay, that might actually help us deliver on this social and affordable standpoint. But how do we get Peter to be able to pay maybe $100,000, $140,000 for that piece of land, not the $275,000 or $300,000 market price that might be attached to that section? And is it a good thing for society overall that the not-for-profit, not-for-dividend nature of Community of Refuge Trust is the place where landowner who says, I'm not getting my full market value, but Peter's organization is well run, they'll look after that and they'll recycle that piece of value time and time again. So that's the new space that we're in. And I again come back to that question in my limited amount of time left here around how do we make sure that Peter has got access to resources? Does it always have to be government resource? Not necessarily. Can it be an opportunity for other socially responsible investment to move into this space? And yeah, Peter's organization is well run. They happen to be also registered under the new Community Housing Regulatory Authority that is in existence just since the 14th of April this year. They've got some long-term goals. They're meeting families' needs. What if we were to make a socially responsible investment in court to the tune of that 140K price point, and we'll do that for a 4% return? That's the kind of opportunity that's out there and the kind of stuff we're looking at across the sector for how we introduce some of these new levers into the marketplace. Now, that's not the only piece. That's just one tiny piece. To deliver that same level of affordability there for that family long term, we're still going to need good old-fashioned equity. How does equity come into the place? Well, historically, it's come in through government grants. Great that we've had a government in the past 3 years willing to have a social housing fund at the scale of $140 million. Then we have a back to surplus budget, and that amount is now $10 million. So how are we supposed to be growing a sector to be delivering 20 to 30,000 housing units and yet have the core piece of equity that's meant to come into it substantially reduced? So we do have the minister's well aware that these are the views and the challenges that we face. There's no surprise there. But I just think that there's opportunities that we find the right role for government to play around its ability to contribute equity. We find the right way to de-risk and then drive cost out of the financing aspect of the project, okay? We do the project in the best way possible. We should not be cutting corners that, oh, well, because that's meant to be an affordable house, it's somehow supposed to be cheaper. So let's say we just won't put heating into it, or we won't put in insulation. Well, what are we doing? That's not the kind of cost savings that we need to save there. And so I'll just mention that this retained housing option is one of the new spaces that we think there is significant space to grow. Ideally, I would have thought the new developments, given the demand, shouldn't be at around 5%. Why wouldn't we get a well-balanced mixed community if the retained housing was 30% of that new development? Wouldn't that be the scale that would actually let us catch back up with the scale of the issues that we've got? And I guess the last point that would like to make here is that we need to come up with clear systems that are robust and they work year in, year out, so we can make long-term commitments to them. Like, I'll take Homestar for a second. Is Homestar perfect? Some say it isn't, some say it is. But it's the best thing we've got right now that actually lets us compare the quality of a house in one circumstance with the quality in another one. And it also helps us make the case to government and to other investors that this house is worth this much investment because it looks, smells, and feels and performs in a particular way, and we know that those deliver on the long-term social and health benefits that we're after. So that's me. I'll stop there, Leigh.
Thank you very much indeed. It's fantastic. Tim, your go.
Thanks, Scott. I'll just echo that. I think Homestar is a fantastic tool that's ready for the industry. It's adapted to the industry, and I think the more we see take-up of it, the more we'll see a really good level playing field and people using tools that are going to advance the industry. I'm a designer. I've got experience in housing and development and urban regeneration, but I don't really want to talk about design this afternoon. You're going to potentially hear more of the same, because I think one of the critical things we need to talk about really is the whole financial parameters around our industry. And at the moment we might say, hey, things are booming, isn't that great? We're in a healthy market, everybody's busy. We can't crank out work fast enough at the moment in our office, and probably a lot of people in the room are in the same situation. But we should be paying close attention to some of the underlying issues. Why? Because actually we all want to be in a healthy business position in 5 or 10 years' time. And more importantly, probably for the whole country, a lot of our wealth and our stability is tied up in housing and finance of housing. And so our future, our pensions, lots of financial factors come out of how well we handle this situation. And it strikes me that the crisis we have in affordability actually is a lot to do with how we've set financing up. And I think we can do a lot better. I think we need to have a look at critically what's wrong with it and what's working about it. And so I'm just going to flag three observations and 3 quick ideas as to how potentially you could look at moving forward in some of those space. We've got, I think, a real issue with the fact that a lot of our finance is not connected to the actual housing itself and the location it's in. So if you look at how property was traditionally financed when markets started to grow and we did more than just have feudal landlords in European countries centuries ago, a lot of it was very locally based, and you can look at the roots of things like the mutual societies in the UK who, after the 2008 crash, they're now the most robust financial institutions we have. Why? Because they're local and they're accountable and the money doesn't go very far. It doesn't get lost in the ether of global financing. Second point, and many people have touched on this, we seem to be supplying the wrong product. Now, that isn't to point the finger at blame at the building industry, but it's to ask the big question of how do we get around that problem? Why are we building stuff in the wrong place at the wrong size when we know that the demand is somewhere else? Is it fake demand we're catering for? Have we somehow not judged the market demand right, or is it that we're just stuck in business as usual models? And I think Karchi's going to talk later about some of the kind of initiatives around smaller homes. That's definitely an agenda we need to think really cleverly about, and there's lots of models that we can push into and talk about options around that. And I guess the third issue for me is, again, we've just touched on it here in the panel, we build for the short term and then we get surprised when it comes and bites us down the line. And we're a fairly young country. Our post-war development model is still probably a little bit behind the kind of guys in the US and other countries who pioneered it. You think of Levitt and the models that he put together in the States after the war. What they're finding is that 30 odd years after you build the kind of post-war estate models, the cost of the infrastructure and the issues that arise with building stuff around motorways and big box retail clusters and tract housing actually come back and bite you as a bunch of ratepayers and as a settlement in the community has to pay the bills in the long term. There are other ways to do this stuff, and we need to think really cleverly around how we can actually maintain a viable business in the future for a lot of us and cater to need and actually still be able to pay the bills in the future. So one example, you look at the states now and the bills they've got for their interstate systems and their infrastructure that they built after the war, they can't afford to keep it up. They've got infamous bridge collapses and issues like that happening because they simply can't, as a community, finance the stuff that they built 50 years ago. So we need to think very long and hard about that. 3 ways forward I'm just going to quickly suggest. One is, how do we get some more intelligent financing? Well, other countries already do it differently in some cases, and also I think you'll hear more ideas this afternoon on new emerging models that could come with that. 2 very quick examples. Mexico, in essence, has a system like the US. It has a couple of state-owned enterprises that underwrite the mortgage market, and they underwrite the vast majority of the mortgage market. It's a thriving private mortgage market. And during the 2008 sort of crisis that their near neighbour suffered, they were only issuing 500,000 mortgages a year. Why? Because those SOEs have got a very different basis. They're funded through cash that comes from an employee levy off your paycheck, and so their financing of lending is really tied to how much income is the country actually borrowing at that one time. But they have a thriving private mortgage market, and it's a very healthy development industry. The other interesting aspect of that, which I don't know whether you know, is that in 2012, I gather 90% of the mortgages issued through that system were tied to Homestar type tools. So they've got a market take-up of people saying, oh, we'll take mortgages on the basis that I have to provide certain features and specs on my houses, and that's now by far the majority of their market. Very, very consumer friendly. Denmark's got a very different system. We operate, like most countries, fractional banking. You've got to have a small amount of money in the bank and you can lend 10 times as much or whatever in terms of regulatory, that proportion varies. Denmark actually requires banks to have a matching deposit to match the sum loaned, and the outcome of that is effectively a very robust saving system and an almost default-proof banking system. Anybody who was in the States or the UK like I was when the crisis happened knows this stuff comes very close to home. We've kind of dodged it and not really been in contact with it in this country. It's a serious issue when those financial systems collapse. And so just 2 very quick things. Business models for all of us who are involved in development. I think there's probably a disruptive business model around the corner with lots of potential for small companies to come and do development differently. Many of us are sort of in a space where we go, well, how do we change? We know what our business model is. We know how we want to build things. We want to build them in the way that keeps the cost down and makes sure we can deliver it to the consumer at the lowest front price. Well, Actually, I think people are changing. Demand is going towards something that is more efficient, and we're in a situation like the car makers where if we're not careful, we're going to be like the old GMs and American companies, and the Japanese will come in and build something more efficient, and surprise, surprise, they'll take over the market like they have in this country. So the biggest sellers now are not V8 Holdens, they're mid-sized Corollas. And so people are after quality and fuel efficiency, and those things will become the talismans of what become the product identifiers in the future market, I think. Finally, I think we've got to extend that sort of thinking to the whole development model about how we take land, build infrastructure, and develop our neighbourhoods, because people are looking for something different, but for whatever reason, our business and our planning systems are not delivering more compact and more centrally located dwellings. It doesn't have to be apartments. I think there's a huge latent demand for families to live in smaller houses near the city centre. And for whatever reason, we've got to take those two sides of the equation that are currently almost by various commentaries played against each other, the planning system and the delivery system, and go, how do we get them to work alongside each other and actually get a much better outcome for neighbourhoods that are much better functioning and work for people to live in?
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Tim. Okay, so we've heard 4 kind of parallel views and opinions and some solutions there. It seems to be kind of common theme, seems to be about time. I mean, how we're going to build all these houses in time, and money. You know, how are we going to pay for them? And is it about building sustainably for the future, changing the paradigm from current cost to long-term cost? Is it about changing the way we build houses? You know, instead of building on muddy building sites, let's build them in nice clean factories. Can we look at financing and more? Can we look at taking 20,000 families out of the normal commercial market and easing the pressure that way? So, does anybody have a point or a question they'd like to put to any of the panel members? Please. So the microphone's just running on its way to you. In fact, 2. Who's going to get there first?
Hi, my name is Michael Davis from Jasmax Architects, working in the residential field. One of the focuses that has been definitely throughout this development, I was on a talk yesterday, it was on that. It's all about new homes and building 39,000 new homes. We build homes of 220 square metres. Europe builds them of 100 square metres. So one question is there a whole model that we're ignoring here, which is the adaptation of the existing housing stock? Because literally we could cut them all in half and double all the houses that we've already got.
So buying shares in chainsaw companies right now.
Well, are we ignoring a whole market? It doesn't seem to be coming up in any of the talks that we're going to. Is there another market we're not?
This has struck me when you hear conversations about, you know, the median income in Auckland is like $70,000 or something. So that means people can only afford houses of 300,000. Then why isn't somebody filling that gap? And I think Tim was saying I don't understand why that is the case. I've noticed going around the country that there's a slight culture change happening in what people expect from their housing. They do now want housing to be warm and dry and efficient to run. I haven't quite picked up this thing about scale, but I'd be interested in, you know, any, Pip, if you've had any kind of views on that and conversations. Okay.
Well, look, I think that the size issue is something that particularly the imperatives of Auckland City are trying to address with the kind of intensification. Implicit in that is a smaller package. But I guess always it seems to me you have the kind of demographic imperative like that collides with a kind of social expectation. You know, that a large part of the building press and reward systems, award systems and so forth are geared around a kind of ever-inflating kind of size and, you know, number of bathrooms, bedrooms and fittings and God knows what. And so I think there's a whole piece of work to do there and kind of somehow correlating what the country can afford or how it can address those sort of mass issues of housing with those kind of aspirational changes, which are essentially received ones out of, you know, particularly American kind of standards of space. I think those are quite hard things to do. You know, I think, as I said, there's a whole industry kind of geared around that. And I guess if you leave a market to operate under its own steam, it will inevitably pursue the greatest reward, which is basically size related by and large. So I think, my argument is you've got to have more manipulation in there in order to offer options which are smaller in size and yet meet the kind of values which are implicit in what we somehow collectively believe are important for New Zealand families. And, in that respect, I'd say we haven't really done terribly much serious research since perhaps even the star flats of the 1960s or 70s, of how people can live densely in smaller areas. And so I think there's a role in there, again, for government agencies as kind of research models. How do you get a whole bunch of people in 100 square metres and still allow them to have a tin boat outside and do those kind of things?
Can I suggest...
Pam?
Yeah, thanks. Can I suggest too that as an industry, we need to internally reshape the cost per square metre conversation, and I'd suggest that we need to align really closely with the quantity surveyors on that one. I don't know that... are there any quantity surveyors in the room? Great. Well, I think you've got a really important role to play in this conversation, because our customers, our end users, are fixated on cost per square metre, which only it obviously is cost effective when you've got an enormous house and an overpriced section. So if we're going to persuade people to reduce the sizes of their homes, we have to have a very persuasive argument about the value they're going to receive in return. And we just simply can't talk about size and dollars in the same sentence. Yeah.
I'm just going to quickly add one thing. I don't know whether most people have picked it up, but there is actually a provision in the unitary plan that pretty much allows you to chop your house in two if it exists. I don't know whether everybody even twigged that. I actually think it's a really good policy, because I think it's about letting people stay in our communities and effectively build a granny flat type arrangement. So there is a rule in there, I believe, which is basically that you can add a minor unit without new car parking, without new private space. It's got to be in contact with the existing building. It's primarily about that sort of extension and adaptation rather than dropping something on the back of the site. I think it's a great policy. So I think people are doing something about it. If the public hasn't picked up on that yet, I think that's a great stealth position, because I think in a few years' time, even though many of us are involved in the delivery of new buildings, that'll be a very positive development for the city.
Scott, what's your social housing take on this?
Yeah, well, I guess then what I'd say is it comes back to the financing for that. So that large family home that potentially gets chopped in half has a $700,000 price tag on it. What it needs to get ratcheted down to is, if it is going to get chopped in half, either through reconstruction or literally putting a wall down the middle, then is it then two $250,000 units, or are they actually become one $200,000 unit and one $400,000 unit? So there's $100,000 of value wiped off the page. Now, our banking system doesn't want that to happen, because that destroys the underlying value. It now is a high LVR situation. So where are we coming up with those financing tools that allow that to occur, and you don't end up with, then we all live in really small things that we're paying even more for, because that's what the price can only go up in order to keep it fitting within the current value methodology. So we got to do something about that value methodology.
Okay, gentleman over here, please.
Hi there, Daniel from Greenbridge and Taranaki. Just sort of following on from that, the other thing I thought about is the repurposing of properties that aren't necessarily your expensive $900,000 home, but in depressed areas or even commercial buildings. It's not something that's come up. And I know it's been done in the past, but there's a lot of underutilised commercial buildings in the city. And the other thing is actually just decentralisation. We're all talking about let's all go to the cities, but there are other options as well, so I'd be interested to hear what you guys have to say about that.
Who wants to pick that up?
I'm glad somebody asked about the decentralization thing, because we recently attended the Māori Housing Conference, which was in Wanganui, which has some of the lowest house prices in New Zealand. And Housing New Zealand was unable to sell properties at, I think, don't quote me on the exact, it's like $50,000 for an ex-state house in that market that they still couldn't sell, partly because of the condition of the property, but because it didn't actually represent great value in that market. If we're going to actually do that, then where's the matching strategy around job creation that happens in the provinces so that we're not trying to cram everybody onto the narrowest isthmus in the country and actually look at something that spreads people throughout the country. I spent some time in Norway, and admittedly they have, you know, a pipeline of subsidy that the country's able to share around, but compared to Sweden, they're very happy to subsidize transport costs so that a small factory in a rural community can be economically viable, as opposed to trying to move all industry to one location. So there are choices there, and I guess that's all I'm trying to say, is we should make some choices.
If I can add to that, in terms of getting jobs into the regions, I know that there's tremendous potential in our timber industry to add value and to get jobs back out to where the forests are, in Northland, East Cape. And you may already know this, that a number of our larger prefabrication facilities are in the regions. They're in Matamata, they're in Hastings, they're in Timaru, Oamaru. You know, they're not in Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch. So I think there is good potential there, but it does mean connecting every step of the value chain to make it happen. But yeah, those are really valid points.
Yeah, just addressing the issue of reuse of buildings. I think there's some of that going on at the moment. There are some interesting, well, in fact, I know there are, we're involved in some. There are some interesting issues of getting buildings geared around commercial or industrial use to fit residential code requirements, you know, with respect to acoustics and fire and egress and so forth, but by and large they can be dealt with. But I think, you know, that's an example of what I was trying to say before, that, you know, if one builds for a longer life, that the base building is long life, that has to be the best kind of strategy for sustainability. That, you know, to not build a building is the best thing you might do, and the way to achieve that is to reuse those buildings which exist, or to build buildings now with the intention that they are reused and refit, and that they may need some new technology, they may need better insulation or better servicing and so forth, but that core high-cost structure and building enclosure is built for, you know, 200 years, 300 years, whatever.
If I can just extend that as well, I think matching that, the zoning system that we operate here is incredibly rigid and locks us into land use, and we can't adapt our land use in lots of ways. So I think we've got to fix that underlying system. We used to kind of adopt that sort of system in the bad old days when there was dirty industry and we were trying to protect people from stuff that could be on their doorstep. That pretty much doesn't exist in the same way anymore. There's no reason why we should be making things segregate and separate and have big transport distances between. People are remarkably adaptable at living in quite complex environments, and they'll happily settle next to stuff, and we really shouldn't be. In my view, the unitary plan is doing some great stuff, but there's some really old school thinking in it, unfortunately. Just split it all out and segregate everything, make everybody live a long way from where you work. It's kind of daft.
But isn't that what mixed use development is trying to crack, and there's a fair portion of that in the unitary plan, isn't it?
It is, but I think there's still too much underlying assumption towards a rigid picture of how everybody lives and works, and how business operates and how people run their lives.
Over there on this table. In the
I just want to confirm what Tim had to say. I actually bought a house about 10 years ago that had been completely separated. And again, the former owner had actually dealt with the fire rating and the acoustics. So, and it's a totally permitted split house. And surprising for me, it was probably the cheapest house in the area to buy. Been on the market 2.5 years, and no one wanted it. And all the services, everything was done. It's all signed off. You know, and in terms of putting the boat on the back lawn, there's an enormous back lawn to boot. But there is a real prejudice about splitting houses in half, in my opinion.
I think you're right. I think there's some fears and some assumptions. Equally, I've had conversations in the last 24 hours with people who say, I live in a big, grand old house and I'd like to split it. And I'd like to stay living in the small part and rent the rest out. And I think I've seen that at work in plenty of cities. Many other people will do. That's a very sound model of property ownership, which helps people in so many different dimensions, financially, socially, lots of good things to it. So I hear what you're saying, but I guess what we're all pointing towards is a lot of our assumptions around what people expect and how the markets behave are changing quite rapidly at the moment.
In terms of splitting houses up, but what about making houses bigger? We hear a lot in Auckland about the high proportion of Pacific Island people that we have here who tend to culturally live in bigger family groups than European people. And are we doing enough to create enough choices for Pacific Islanders? Scott, you might have a view on that.
Yeah, I think so. If we're going to use, just picking on Tim's point here around that we can design and build a property, and Pip, your point about being able to design and build that property today that could be reconfigured and reused. So let's play that out a little bit. So if we're designing, I'm going to pick on attached townhomes for a moment, because we often need to get a couple, 3 stories out of something to get greater use of the land there. So how would we design a row of attached townhomes today that have a common stair that could allow that unit to be used by one large family for a period of time? And again, maybe it's a community housing organization that owns 4 in a row together there. All of a sudden there's a need for single person or two units, and you could make that stairway public to access each unit on the 3 floors. One of those actually gets sold in a shared ownership situation to that member. The organization rents the other 2 units. That kind of configuration and change might happen a dozen or more times over the life of that building, but it's then linking the access to the resource. Where I'm going with this isn't one of the things we're missing is the form of an institutional owner. And sure, I'll say that could certainly be a community housing organization, but it could be other institutional owners who are the ones who can play the role in, we still have an ownership, a percentage share in all of these units, so we can manage that process and facilitate that.
I'll give you a very direct example. So one of the bits of work that I did before I came to New Zealand was with IKEA on a housing product. So many people don't know. The joke is, of course, you turn up with an enormous Allen key to put the house together, but that's not really what you do. But you do buy the housing through their stores. They sell it in most of the Scandinavian countries, and we were bringing it into the UK. That's a commercial long-term partner model. If you bought into that system, you could buy the whole thing outright. You could rent it. You could go up and down in a split of how much you rented and bought. So if you started as a first-time buyer, you might buy 50% of it and rent the rest at a lower rate. Over time, if your income goes up, you might buy it outright. Equally, and this was very unusual, even amongst community housing type groups, you could then sell it back to them or sell down a part of it to them. That's a commercial entity running a really viable long-term model, which hits exactly that button. Works.
I don't know how long checkout queue would be for the house.
Very big trolley.
Yeah, and I think also, I might be right or wrong, that weren't Housing New Zealand embarking on a programme of actually putting new bedrooms onto houses to expand? Yeah. So, which is kind of like prefabrication of modules that you slide onto an existing house.
But the only challenge there is we haven't cracked the tenure aspect of that, because when the family then is doing better and either has outgrown that house or can pay market price for it, they have to move. So we haven't added the innovation of the change in tenure to go with the flexibility of the product. And we can do that, it's just we can't do it in that particular format.
Anybody, any other views, disagreeing, agreeing?
Is this thing on? Yeah, hi, Nick, just a humble engineer, but I was listening to Warwick quite closely this morning, and I think as part of the design community would absolutely agree with the most sustainable thing you can do is build long term and make things repurposable and reusable. Warwick gave a bit of a warning about with ever increasing land prices, you might get into a scenario where anyone who was to buy that land would look at the improvement that you've put on there as potentially just a hindrance to making the most of the now further increased land price, and that we could just see these things, even if we put our heart and soul into designing them really well, just get knocked out of the way. It wasn't a warning I heard before, and it made me shiver a bit. Is that anything that you guys have any opinion on?
Well, I can actually back that up, because in my suburb, that's actually what's happening. houses are being bought, and then you walk down the street next day and the house isn't there anymore, and somebody's putting a huge new house on it. So anybody got a perspective on that from the experts?
Well, look, I'll have a go. I guess the question is then, where's the infrastructure in that neighborhood community, and what's that infrastructure designed for? So if you've got an area that's got really good transport links, and that it's close to water, sewer, good scale infrastructure over time, where is that factored into what that future purposing of that site is? So in often cases, we have underbuilt given proximity to core infrastructure. Other cases we've overbuilt and then have massive cost to upgrade that infrastructure. So, and sometimes these things, they don't, at least, I have this joke, I have this calculator that I use, and often the answers that I get that come out of my calculator don't seem to match with what anybody else's calculator comes up with. And I don't know whether it's, I use different logic or whatever, but in you trying to apply just some basic common sense to those things, there's that value discussion about where we want to invest and what we want to happen in a particular area over time. And I think it goes both ways around. An area that's got a lot of single-family homes, and that's an area that people want to be single-family homes, why have the fight of densifying and intensifying that particular area? Flip side is that, was that the right place to have a lot of low-density development, ? And where are the places that we want to have higher density, that it's relatively inexpensive to add that density? I live in Wellington, and it was, in comparative terms, a speech that I heard given not too long ago that talked about that Wellington has actually allowed intensification next to the water in places where there are roads and transport to a greater extent than Auckland has, and it recognized that there is a view factor. But Wellington has still only done that to a small percentage of what it could do. So, and something like a view of the water doesn't change necessarily. At least I would hope that it's not going to change in any time soon. So I think that's a wider planning discussion, isn't it? And I think those are the things, if we get those right long term, then that question of repurposing something in a particular site isn't so risky.
Do we get to a point where the market can't be left to its own devices? Is this what we're kind of hedging a little bit around?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Look, frankly, I think cities and sort of addressing a national issue like the staggering number of houses are far too complex issues to leave to the market. It just seems irresponsible. Why on earth do we form together in councils and governments if not to regulate and order these sorts of things? It just seems madness. And so, I mean, you do get that sort of driving down to what are the baseline kind of drivers. And, length of mortgage and those sorts of things become determinants of building material, building quality. That just seems absurd. It is what I call, briefly, the commodification of building, that we actually have to take a long-term view of these things. These are major national investments. And so, I believe that the market has a wonderful strength. I think there's a huge efficiency and power that comes out of the market. But I just think these issues are so big that the public purse, and therefore some sort of element of public control or public ordering, needs to enter into that equation.
Does anybody else have any Bolshevik views about that kind of thing?
I would just say about procurement, yes, the industry is looking for some strong leadership, and yes, if the industry could right the affordability and social housing problem by itself, we would have done it by now. Clearly, we need some assistance, and we can all knock off a few areas where we could address that. But I would say in terms of pre-building elements, unless you line up a decent amount of procurement, you're simply not going to get the efficiencies, you're not going to build within the timeframes that you want to. So clearly there's some large leadership that's needed there. And if only our politicians would stay still for a moment, we might be able to get somewhere.
Sorry, I was going to just dangerous territory here, and we've got a question here from the front or a view.
I just wondered, do you see a role in the future for stronger government involvement in housing production?
So the question was, do you see a role for stronger government involvement in housing production?
I'll have a go. It's also a way to say, good on you, Pip. I'm with you there. And to pick up on Pamela's point that there's a glaring opportunity in front of the government right now that if what I hear Pamela say to me is, Scott, you need to organize your members so that they can place an order for 300 houses at a time. Fine that they might be 5 here, 5 there. Fine that they may be spread out over 3 years or something, but make a commitment that you're going to buy 300 houses. I look at the resources that the community housing sector has at it, and we are operating on less than 3-year cycles of access to resources that go up and down, mostly down. And my members would love to commit to a 300 house order, but cannot be financially prudent in doing that given the short-term nature of the commitments and tendering that they've got. So the opportunity that's out there is, so the income-related rent, for example, has now been made available wider than just to Housing New Zealand, but to the community housing sector. Great stuff. We've got 33 registered, regulated providers who can access that around the country. Right now, that subsidy, which is meant to pay a market rent, only works to Joe Blogs for the duration of Joe's need living in a particular location. Government knows that it's going to spend that money over the next decades. We don't know that we're going to spend it on Joe Blogs or Susie Blogs. You don't need to. But you know you're going to spend some of it in Auckland, and you know that you could commit to the set of community housing organizations working in Auckland to that money for the next 30 years. With that, they could go out, ring up Pam, hey, which of the folks can we work with through the value chain with, and start ordering 300 houses. That would be an incredibly smart, prudent, well within existing settings kind of decision that government could make now.
And they may not all be procured in the same place, obviously. You know, this is New Zealand. We can get them procured in about 10 different places. Can I speak also to the Kiwi Bill proposition, which is obviously one prospect that's being dangled in front of us. The PrefabNZ industry, or the prefabrication industry, would support single source procurement like that if the work is distributed amongst a number of providers. But there's still not the certainty with the political cycle that if you gear up for a 10-year program, that program will still be in effect in 3 years' time. So there's some real issues around the year of setup time, or possibly more, and then once the work kicks in, who knows what might change. Yeah, so I think, yes, there's some need for the leadership, the form of that program, and how it is guaranteed across political cycles is something that's yet to be determined.
Tim, you had something to?
Yeah, a few thoughts occur to me, and a lot of it's been said actually already, and I can't help thinking of the fact that we used to have models like this in New Zealand. I'm not familiar with the full details of how the old State Advances Corporation worked, but we had things that worked to intervene in particular ways. But I was just going to add as well, I think, going back to my earlier point about the nature of finance, organisations like building societies, which were non-political but quite local and community-based in the past, have played a very stabilising role in the market in helping that supply of cash, meaning that we avoid the boom and bust sort of cycles. And I think that I can't help thinking that if somebody can come up with a way to establish some sort of a foundation, which, if you look back at the history of these things in Europe, they were often beneficent dictators from manufacturing sort of empires or something like that. If we can find a way to actually get some sort of independent fund-based approach started, then there might be answers in that sector as well.
I think there are precedents, for the kind of manipulation of a market that doesn't necessarily imply a kind of state intervention in terms of manufacture and so forth. I mean, if you look at the supply of drugs in the country, Pharmac is a highly manipulated kind of way of ensuring that cheapest possible medicine is supplied to the greatest number of people. And we have a similar situation. We need the best possible housing applied to the greatest number of people. And that, has, in Pharmac's case, the government sitting in there as a kind of bulk purchaser and then a redistribution of those drugs. So I think, there are mechanisms there which you could tease out. And I don't think they represent any necessary kind of political betrayal even to the populace. I think most people would be enthusiastic of the city if the government were to seize the day and make use of its current mandate.
So where do you think, panel, that leadership should come from? Who should be standing up? Should it be the development community, because opening up a whole new market? Perhaps it should be a political group. Should it be the community sector? Should it be the builders? Who's going to stand up and say, we've got a better way of doing things and this is what we're going to do?
If I might, I mean, I think everybody has to step up. That's fairly important. That's obvious why there's a lot of people in this room today and why it's debated and senior politicians are in a room like this. Equally, I would say it's instructive to look at what's happening around the world and not to prejudge what might come from a point like Pip's just made about people stepping up at a national level. But it's quite instructive that around the world, federal governments are struggling with that kind of issue and that kind of intervention. And it actually comes back to local governments who are taking it on the chin and dealing with these things. You can see it all across the states. You can see it in lots of other countries. But the states are referenced because they're fairly similar to our land models and to our governance models in some ways. And I would just say that goes right to the heart for me of the debate that's currently around the Entry Plan. We're not going to get certain things at the moment as the way it looks if we just wait for central government to come up with it. And if we can, we need to encourage all the positive outcomes we can through local planning and regulation. I'll put a big caveat on that. I think less regulation is generally good. It's got to be clever and smart and well balanced. And I think 7,000 pages of the proposed Auckland Unitary Plan is not a good, well-balanced tool. But I think we should be looking to our local leaders in a big way to actually be quite productive and helpful in that debate.
I guess I'd completely agree, Tim, and I would just add that everything we need, we already have. There isn't a piece we're missing. We just need to let all the pieces work together, and we seem to turn one thing on and turn two other things off for reasons that I'm never quite clear on why we lock ourselves away from not using tools that otherwise appear to be good things to do.
And I would agree that this is an industry-led plan that is then put forward to a political arena, in which case we nod and agree when they say it's their brilliant idea. But I would say also that we can make more use of the vehicle we've got called the Construction Industry Council, which many of you may know of, which is the association of associations, so the peak bodies for all the professional roles plus all the material types sit around one table, and that is a voice piece for the industry. So I think, feed all your fantastic ideas up through your associations, and, we'll try and work something out.
Okay, sorry, lady here.
Just a comment on that, and it's a complex issue. That's why we're in this situation. It's complex. We have complex emotions, we have complex set of materials, we have complex construction methods, complex problem. And suggesting that everybody is responsible, I completely agree with, but it means it makes it even more complex. I think the tendency has been to simplify it, but that in itself creates its own problems. We have technology these days that make it a lot more simple to deal with complex problems. Lumio is a good example, and there will be more and more. That's all.
Thank you. So a question over here. Jasmax table. They're primed, They're primed.
I've clearly upset people in work at some point. Just a quick question. We're talking about supply and demand, and that's been a big focus of a lot of the lectures that I've been to recently. Interestingly, Larry Murphy at Auckland University, I went to his lecture. He said that they've done exactly what we're doing currently. They've done in Ireland. This was a few years ago. They increased their home building from 30,000 homes to 90,000 homes. They increased the greenbelt land. They increased the brownfield sites, greenfield sites, etc., etc. House prices went up. I don't have the exact figures on me, but house prices went up 1,000%. So is there another model that we need to be introducing? Because it's clearly been demonstrated in other countries that supply and demand doesn't do it. It still gets left to the market. The house prices will sell at market value, and supply and demand didn't make any difference in those countries. Is it going to make a difference here?
Well, they're skewed models, aren't they? I mean, that particular one was skewed by speculative kind of purchasing, I think. And I suppose there are kind of fiscal strategies that you can insert in there to kind of stem that or slow it down. I mean, I just don't think that's a great example with respect to just pure supply and demand. I do think we have to deal with those as kind of flat-footed things, but be very mindful of the skewing of that market by speculation, both internal and external in that case.
Thank you. This gentleman, that table just over there. Hand up, thank you.
Thank you. The problem that was spoken about earlier by Warwick, I think, about the cost of land and how expensive it is, and if you were able to get a piece of land that was worth 140, and you built a house on that, then you've got houses that become affordable. So in Auckland especially, we have new subdivisions that are being created left, right and centre where the sections are 500 square metres and they're building 400 square metre, 450 square metre houses on them left, right and centre. You can't find anything else other than that because the age-old thing, you build more and people have better value, which is a funny economy that we have at the moment. And that's why houses aren't affordable. I believe that's why so many houses are unaffordable in Auckland. How do you change that mindset? And the panel are extremely have great abilities. How do we change that mindset when that speculative development market to one that culture might be more happy with?
I just think, I just think we have to keep putting the options in front of our clients and help making them an informed choice. I think the specifiers have got a huge role in both educating their clients as well as serving them. And I would propose that on a section like that, a 2 or, heaven forbid, a 3 unit development has got to stack up and have better returns for the developer or client for them to address it. I too agree it's a tremendous shame that we're getting 1 and 2 people in these 4-bedroom houses, or we're getting the stone fields where they just keep making them because people keep buying them. And the only reason people keep buying them is because they don't have an alternative choice. So until we provide them with a reasonable range of small, medium density choices, we will keep producing, all respect to Rosine, tea-coloured 4-bedroom double garage houses.
But isn't there actually a government-driven model? If I'm right in thinking, Housing New Zealand is taking large sections with the house in the middle of the quarter-acre section and putting 2, 3, 4 kind of townhouse units on it, and a couple of them for social and a couple for market. So there we've got a directed economy model because the government owns it, saying this is what we can do. And I've been down to the opening of some of those Housing New Zealand developments, and people like them. So why isn't the development industry following that model? I don't have an answer. Maybe somebody else does.
I don't know. I was going to not steal your thunder at all, Karcher, but say there's good stuff coming, I'm sure. Those guys are doing an interesting model, exactly the same, leading the way. It's difficult to say some of this stuff without offending people, so I don't mean to be offensive, but we have got to change some of the key influences in the industry. And actually, if I'm frank about it, I think the guys who handle sales and marketing are key. We have to get to a different model of how people deal with that front end, because that influences so many different things. It influences the consumer perception, it influences developer decisions. I've seen that stuff happen. We'll start with the development and the developer swears blind it's going to be affordable and primarily 2 and 3 bedroom and not big stuff. And by the time you've got the real estate agents involved, it's all 4 and 5 bedrooms on the same site plan for the same development. That's a problem. Where's that coming from? Because it's not coming from a tie through to the demand of people who live in the city who want to buy it. Quite. And we've got to be straight up about that. Let's not pull any punches. There is a big issue in that space. Now, I think what people like the NZGBC are doing is great in working with RINES and tapping into some real market intelligence about what people actually express they want, need to. And I think we were talking before about, there's an understanding that dry, where's the sun, and is it going to be healthy to live in, is becoming much closer to the top of the list of buyers' preferences than has it got 3-car garaging and am I near the motorway? We've got to get more intelligent, because I think the buyers are actually out there who want that stuff, and it's being screened. It's being filtered out by an unhelpful middle layer at this point. I do think, going back to the earlier very interesting discussion in the room on finance, there's still inherent barriers. We know you can't get finance for certain things. We know the risk falls the other way and the benefit of the doubt falls on certain things. We've got to fix that. It's a major, major problem that we're being made to buy stuff because the guy financing it, who's never going to touch the thing, wants it a particular way for you to live in. What a crock. That's got to change.
Scott?
Yeah, look, I just add in complete agreement there that we have a tool right in front of us right now, and I'll be interested, and I hope you all are as interested as I am, to see what some honest monitoring will show about what we're getting out of the accords across the country and out of the special housing areas. The only reason you're meant to be able to proceed with a development in a special housing area is that it's both increasing supply but also delivering on affordability. And if what we see happen is that the absence of clear requirements to deliver a certain amount of affordability, because we want to leave flexibility to the marketplace, leaves us with, well, we thought we could, but in the end we didn't, as the only reason why we didn't get the amount of truly affordable product out of this process, well then surely that's enough evidence that some lack of some really smart regulation around there left a few people holding a very big bag and left a whole lot of people holding nothing. But do we have to go through a cycle of letting that occur and monitoring it before we wake up to the opportunity that's in front of us to deliver on it now?
I think there's also a standing problem of covenants that get put in on new developments that limit the minimum size of housing. Do we have a question here, or have you been answered?
I'd just like to talk to that. I'm sorry to interrupt. I'll be very brief. I think, we're kind of dealing with kind of aspirations and really hard things to cut across personal aspiration when it comes to that kind of property decision making, where people get incredibly conservative. The other kind of side of that is that if you're talking about qualitative versus quantitative things, it's always incredibly hard, I find, as an architect, to argue for quality, and quality might be long life, warm, dry, sunny, and all those sorts of things, and weigh that off against, well, this has got 2 bedrooms or 2 bathrooms and all that kind of stuff. So I think that, I would just say as a kind of general kind of grabble, that we probably need to, as an industry and as a industry press, need to focus a bit more on those kind of qualitative issues and how they actually play out day by day in terms of quality of life, longevity of life, health, well-being, all those kind of things.
Right. Just talking in response to some of the questions, from the community housing sector, we specialise in affordable housing, and we specialise in 1 and 2 bedroom units. And you can build low-rise, medium density, but the greatest problem of delivering on this is actually the council that won't allow you to do it. Yeah. And we have 2 sections. They are large sections, 1,000 square metres, 1,200 square metres. On the 1,000 square metres, we're building 8 one-bedroom units. On the 1,200 units, we're building 11 units of 1 and 2 bedrooms. You can do it. We do it low-rise, 2 stories, so we build them in blocks so they look like houses, 4 units to a block. They're built out of wood, so it's fairly sort of affordable. But our greatest problem at the moment is with council regulation just not allowing us to do this. And the unitary plan, which is introduced, doesn't give us much hope that we're going to be able to do it in the future too. So an answer to whether it can be done, it's certainly been done in the past, but we can't do it today, and it really comes back to a regulatory problem that we have.
Thank you. David, did you have a...
The wonderful Homestar rating, which we all love, but it's impotent at the moment because it's just a voluntary thing, and I don't see a lot of. I see it being drastically underutilised. So my question to the panel is, how can we progress Homestar to the point where it becomes mandatory, a mandatory declaration? And because I think that if we could get to that stage, it would have a huge impact on the industry.
A fantastic question. But I'll see you afterwards.
I agree that we need to be speaking a common language. We need our clients, our homeowners, our developers to be able to understand and appraise one house or one unit against another. I don't think we can do it without the Real Estate Institute, and I only suppose that that's the conversation that must be going on between the Green Building Council and the Real Estate Institute. Unless the real estate agents understand what they're dealing with and what they're selling, then yes, it becomes impotent. And perhaps all Green Building Council members abide by using Homestar, and you just grow from there.
Can I say? But let's tie some financial incentives to it. What if your mortgage interest rate dropped 1/4 point for every extra star your house had, right? What if you had any level of government investment in housing required a minimum, pick the star, 4 or 5 level, with some other cost allowances for every additional star you went up above that.
And I think there's some very good arguments for doing that. Purely, why would a mortgage lender do that? Well, it's a lower risk of default. Your homeowner has lesser outgoings. They are a less risky lending proposition. It's a really sound commercial model.
I think the reason why real estate has been slow to pick up on it is because it's not that hard to sell a house in Auckland at the moment.
I think we need to show it as well. PrefabNZ set up a home innovation village hive in Christchurch, and all the houses, we did it jointly with Homestar, all the houses were meant to go through the Homestar and LifeMark rating. I'll put LifeMark in the same basket. And I think we need to show it, and we need people to experience it for them to understand it. I think it was Steve Jobs who said people don't understand what they want until they're shown it. I think there's really strong merit in that, and we've seen that with the numbers of people that have come through the hive and who went through the Kiwi Prefab exhibition in New Plymouth a couple of summers ago. That was because there was 4 houses on the waterfront. And for those like myself who are from Wellington, when the First Light solar decathlon house was on the waterfront in 2 weeks, over 10,000 people went through that. So I think there's a lot of work to do in the show and tell space, and PrefabNZ has been working with Auckland Council and ACPL for over 18 months to try and do something around multi-residential showcase housing in Auckland, which is going nowhere fast. So watch the Hive Wellington space.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we probably need to draw a close on this session now. Thank you all for your comments, your input, and your interest. Could we give, please, a big hand to our panelists who have filled that?